the Battle of the Somme, one of the most brutal and costly battles of the First World War. A campaign that lasted over 4 months with over 1 million men killed or wounded. It was a battle that defined an entire generation. Among the countless lives lost were brothers, sons and fathers, many of whom never returned home. Some were buried where they fell, while others remain missing, their names carved into memorials that stand as eternal reminders of their sacrifice. In this video, we uncover the stories of 4 men, each with their own journey, their own duty and their own tragic end. Join me as we remember those who fought and fell on the Somme and uncover their tales from the trenches. Before we begin, in the coming weeks I'll be visiting the battlefields of the Somme, walking the very ground where so many brave men fought and fell. If you have a family member who served or is buried on the Somme, I would love to hear their story. Whether they survived or made the ultimate sacrifice, their memory deserves to be honoured. If you'd like me to visit their grave or the battlefield where they served, and possibly share their story here on the channel, please drop a comment below. I can't promise I'll be able to visit every site, but I'll do my best. Let's remember them together. Philip Egerton Wedgwood was born on the 12th of September 1897 in Kingstown, County Dublin, Ireland. He served with the 16th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles, later being attached to the 14th Young Citizens Battalion. On July 1st, 1916, the 14th Battalion took part in the assault on the Schwaben Redoubt, a heavily fortified German position during the first day of the Battle of the Somme. During this intense combat, 2nd Lieutenant Philip Egerton Wedgwood was tragically killed in action. He was just 18 years old. But the grief for the Wedgwood family did not end there. That very same day, Philip's older brother, Lieutenant Gilbert Colclough Wedgwood, also lost his life. Born in 1893, Gilbert had started his career at Ulster's Bank Belfast head office before enlisting into the army in October 1914. By 1916, he had attained the rank of lieutenant in the Machine Gun Corps. Like his younger brother, he was killed on the 1st of July 1916 during the same brutal offensive. He was just 22 years old. The exact circumstances of Philip's death are known thanks to a letter written by Reverend Canon King, one of the chaplains of the Ulster Division, to Philip's father. The letter reads,
Dear Mr. Wedgwood, I write to tell you of my deep sympathy in your very great sorrow. I knew your sons well. I saw a great deal more of 2nd Lieutenant Philip Egerton Wedgwood because he remained in the battalion and he and I were intimate friends. He was the most lovable boy and as brave as a lion. He looked so young that when he was chosen to go to the front with the 14th, I felt it deeply. No one could have borne himself more courageously during the heaviest fighting than he did. When the 14th endured a terrible bombardment on April 6th, he spent the night digging out the killed and wounded. How he stood it, I can hardly think, and yet he showed no signs of the terrible time he had passed. I remember meeting him one day when his battalion were going into the trenches one day near this, and he was quite hurt because he had to go back for 10 days to a school of instruction in some special subject. He was sorry to miss the danger and not be with his men. Lieutenant Cosdale, who was wounded, told me the circumstances of his death. He was in the German trenches and was taking prisoners in the dugouts. He and his party had bombs with them, and the Germans were at their mercy. He came to a dugout where there were some 20 Germans. He might have killed these, but instead offered them their lives if they would come out and surrender. They did so, and all came out. He turned his back for one moment, and one of them treacherously shot him dead. My last talk of him was on the 24th June. I loved to meet him and was often with him. I know how deeply he loved his parents and family, and I had often seen his eyes fill up with tears when your health was poor, and when I was asking about you and home. I do not know the particulars of his brother's death. I am sure that Captain Makanaki, the CO of the Brigade Machine Gun Company, will write you all particulars that are known. I hear he fell when approaching the German trenches, but this may not be so. We here find it difficult to find particulars unless we find some unwounded man who was with those killed. The wounded are sent home so rapidly. You may well be proud in your sorrow. You have forever precious memories of fine lives and noble deaths as the result of your training and loving care.
Captain McConaughey did write a letter to Mr. Wedgwood, which reads,
"It was with much sorrow that I had to report your son, Lieutenant Gilbert Colclough Wedgwood, as killed. From all information I can find, he was killed instantaneously leading his teams across no man's land. His death is a great loss to me and my company. He had done some excellent work in the months he was with us in the trenches, and in the face of the enemy he always showed the coolness and courage which are expected of British officers. During the 7 days bombardment, he was in charge of 4 guns which fired on the enemy all night. The enemy were very much annoyed at his firing, and searched for his guns with heavy shells every day. But your son had selected the positions for his guns and men so carefully that none of them were hit during that period. As a companion in the mess, he was full of spirits. My sole remaining officers and myself send sincere sympathy to you and the family in your hour of sorrow."
Second Lieutenant Philip Edgerton Wedgwood is buried at Mill Road Cemetery, Thiepval, and Lieutenant Gilbert Colclough Wedgwood's body was never recovered and is commemorated on the Thiepval Memorial to the Missing. Alfred Cecil Dudley Page was born in 1894 in Wellingborough, Northamptonshire. During World War I, he served with the 7th Battalion Northamptonshire Regiment, arriving in France on November the 23rd, 1915. On August the 18th, 1916, the 7th Battalion took part in the Battle of the Somme, with orders to capture the heavily defended village of Guillemont. Facing intense resistance from German forces, the battalion suffered heavy casualties during the assault. Among those killed in action that day was 2nd Lieutenant Alfred Cecil Dudley Page. He was 22 years old. One of his comrades, Private George Jones, who was severely wounded in the same battle, later wrote to his mother from a hospital in Hove, recounting the circumstances of 2nd Lieutenant Page's death. His letter reads,
"I am sorry to tell you, Mother, that Lieutenant Page was killed just as he was going over the top. That is, just as he was going over the parapet leading his men into an attack on the German trenches in front. You ought to have seen us going over the top. It was in the afternoon of August the 18th at 2:45 p.m. You would have thought we were going to have a picnic if it had not been for our rifles. We simply went over and did what we were to do, and that was to take Guillemont. The old division did it, and you would have laughed to see the Germans putting their hands up."
Lieutenant B. Luff, a fellow officer, wrote a letter to Alfred's mum, which reads,
"Dear Mrs. Page, on behalf of his brother officers, I write to convey to you the deepest regret and sympathy which we all feel at the loss of your son. 2nd Lieutenant Alfred Cecil Dudley Page was a good comrade and died as a brave man should in action. He led the advance in a most gallant manner and reached the German trench at the head of his platoon. Unfortunately, whilst repelling a bombing attack, he was shot by a sniper and bombed at the same moment, death being instantaneous. His loss is severely felt and deeply deplored by all ranks. It is sincerely hoped that you will derive some consolation from the fact that his conduct excited the utmost admiration, and that his memory will be held in high esteem in the regimental records."
2nd Lieutenant Alfred Cecil Dudley Page's body was never recovered and is commemorated on the Thiepval Memorial to the Missing. Henry Howarth was born in 1876 in Chesterfield, Derbyshire. In October 1914, he enlisted in the 11th Battalion Sherwood Foresters, Notts and Derby Regiment. After completing his training, he was deployed to France on August 27, 1915. On the 1st of July 1916, the 11th Battalion took part in the Battle of the Somme, with orders to assault the defensive positions near Auvillers-la-Boiselle. Under intense machine gun and artillery fire, the battalion suffered heavy casualties. Among those killed in action that day was Lance Corporal Henry Howarth, who was 40 years old. In what will prove to be his final letter home, he wrote,
"If it is my lot to fall, you will be consoled by knowing that I did so by doing my duty for a good cause, and troubling won't do anything."
In pleading with his mother not to worry about him, he said he had many narrow escapes and had great faith in getting through the whole affair. He hoped they would not think he was homesick, as he was not the least downhearted. The only thing that was troubling him was the future welfare of his children. His parents received intimation that their son was mortally wounded whilst his battalion were advancing on the German trenches. Lance Corporal Henry Howarth is buried at Blighty Valley Cemetery, Thiepval Wood. If you like listening to the stories of the history of those who came before, then please give the video a like and subscribe to keep updated about future videos of the history of those who came before.